Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome back. We are again back for this class, that is cognitive and behavioral method. At the initial days we started with the general analysis, then we started with the cognitive task analysis, where first we completed hierarchical task analysis and then we completed that allocation of functions, right. So, today we will take up the last component of cognitive task analysis, that is the critical decision method. Okay. So, let us understand what this method is all about. Here, from this particular terminology, critical decision, we understand that when we are having a particular system in place, the operators are working continuously, then what we need to understand that the whole event critically and what are the points critical events are happening and how the operators are taking decision on it, right. So, once we understand the whole procedure impact of that critical decision on the whole process, we will be able to understand how to minimize the error or how to minimize the accidents further. So, first let us understand what this method all about and what are the process or procedure we should take up when we want to do this particular method. So, yes, it is an approach to cognitive task analysis, and this particular method involves multiple past events in retrospection. So, once we have a particular event already completed, we actually look back, okay, retrospective guide by some kind of probe questions. So, the CDM, we call it in short form, that critical decision method CDM, has been used in the elicitation of experts' knowledge in diverse domain. Okay. So, in many cases we use this particular, not only in design, not only in industrial management or occupational health or in ergonomics field or human factors engineering field. So, in many diverse field we use it, and for applications in including system development and instructional design. So, the CDM research illustrates the short knowledge representation, the products that can be arise from cognitive task analysis. First is the situation assessment record, then timelines and the decision requirements. So, these are the three major components that we are going to work on. So, CDM actually was developed as an extension of the critical incident technique. This is also very old technique. However, there was a requirement to do some specific modification, and then only this CDM has been evolved. Okay. So, CDM uses the in-depth interviews to gather retrospective accounts for challenging incidents. Here it is very important that it is not for every event or it is not for every activities we do critical decision method. Wherever it is very challenging in nature, okay, it is very critically complicated, okay, it is very important, then only we go for this CDM method. It is very interesting. It is a semi-structured interviewing technique, okay. It is not that we completely rely on the structured interview over here. It is a kind of semi-structured interview that we conduct for investigating the phenomena that rely on subtle cues, knowledge, goals, what are the expectations are there that and the expert strategies. That is very, very important. So, we take up some kind of not unstructured, semi-structured interviews to all these type of stakeholders, okay, mainly the operators. CDM also shows how one can approach methodological issues surrounding the cognitive task analysis, including questions about the data quality and method reliability, efficiency and utility. Okay. So, CDM utilizes cognitive probes, very important over here, that it's some kind of probes that we try to use in semi structured interview to elicit the information about how experts formulate their decision making strategies. So, here majorly we will be looking for the strategies, okay, decision making strategies when there is an critical incidence. Whatever the critical incidences are there, we are going to look back the steps to the process, whole points in detail, and then we will be discussing what are the critical decision making strategies has been followed by the experts. So, CDM is used to generate knowledge for the development of expert system, develop training materials and identify requirements, determine the effect of expert system on task performance. So, these are the things normally CDM use for their data. So, let us understand the procedure in detail. So, CDM does not use any strict protocol of interviewing questions. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, it is a kind of semi structure. So, it is structured by a set of interview phases or sweeps. Small components will be there that I will tell you in the next slide, that examine the incident in successively generate greater detail. So, what happens when we have a point, when we have small probes, we try to gather information in the surrounding areas. Okay, so that's the way how do we collect data for CDM. So, a typical CDM session requires approximately 2 hours to move through each of 4 interview sweep. Normally, there are 4 sweep that I am going to tell in the next. So, it is like that kind of time consumption. So, it is a huge involvement. Okay. So, it is not that easy task, it's require lot of training. First of all, it requires lot of time and it needs expertise. Okay. So, that is why critical decision method is very important in those cases where we are actually going to start, or we are going to design a very new system taking influence from the old similar system. And we try to get information, the what were the drawbacks of those system, and we try to improve upon it. Okay. So, their critical decision method help us to improvise the whole system. So, these are the major 4 steps. So, first, identification of a complex potential incident to elicit the discoveries about the cognitive phenomena. So, what are the, it is not when there is a system, it is not only the cognitive, right. So, there are many other components or partially physical components also involved. So, we really need to understand what are the cognitive phenomena are present in the whole system. In the second step, what we do, that create a detailed incident timeline. So, when we are talking about decision making or critical decision method, right. So, in that case where there is an incident and we try to understand step 1 what happened, in second what happened, third what happened. So, on a timeline we actually detail out the incidents. So, different incidences, what we try to do, put it in a particular timeline and which shows the sequence of event. So, once we have the sequence of event in a particular method, we really know that where the problem started. So, at the end, definitely suppose there is an error or there is an accident. However, it must have not started at the initial stage, or it must have not started at the very end stage, somewhere it must have started. So, we try to do through this method, we try to put all these events, one by one in a particular timeline, and once we understand the timeline and we compare it with the standard, then we understand where the problem started. So, here it is very, very important to detail out the incident on a particular timeline. Once this particular stage is over, in the next stage what we do, that we try to find out the whatever the strategies has been taken for managing those decision points which are already embedded in that particular timeline. So, if there is an error, so to overcome that error, what are the decisions has been taken, what are the strategies has been formulated, how they have tried to, how the operators or the involved manpower has tried to discuss this or tried to control it. So, this particular strategies we need to find out. Of course, it is again retrospective, right. So, here once it is done, something happened, then only we go back and try to understand those things. In the last stage, what we do is the probe with what if queries. So, we try to inquire with the stakeholders, okay, that what if it happened, what if this happened, that happened, something like that. So, probe with what if queries to elicit potential expert and novice differences. We try to understand, we try to find out. So, once we know what are the type of people were involved in that particular situation and how these things happen, then we will come to know that what is the difference between the experts opinion and the newcomers. So, then we will understand where the training is required, where the design interventions are required. So, through all these 4 steps, we actually try to get information where the failure in a particular process or system, and how critically someone can analyze it, how critically the decision could have taken, or how the design intervention can help them to take such decision. Okay. So, these are the steps. Now, definitely it is a very important tool and it has lot of advantages. Of course, there are disadvantages, I am going to tell them. However, it has lot of advantages. So, very first advantage is elicitation of real incident. So, what exactly it says? So, capturing the incidents within an expert's experience that require complex cognitive behavior and thought allows the researcher to identify the influences and strategies that might not be included in the very realistic task simulation. Although we have lot of task simulator, like suppose I am talking about air traffic control. So, we have pilot simulator, right. There are, it is a very sophisticated in nature. However, after getting training, after getting all these advantage, all these type of technologies are available, still there are accidents, right. So, when we try to understand those accidents, how do? We try to analyze the real incident. It is not that we do not do in the simulation. So, in simulator we definitely do all those things in a realistic manner. However, real incident are definitely different than the simulation, right. So, what it does? So, it capture those incidences within an expert's experience that requires complex cognitive behavior, very important, okay, complex cognitive behavior. And what you need to do is the thought allows the researcher to identify those influences and strategies. So, influences and strategies that might not be included in even any realistic task simulation. So, which is not possible in this task simulator, those type of thing we can really analyze in through this particular method. Next is in-depth interactive structure. So, the 4 sweep structure that we discussed already allows for an interactive approach to data collection. So, when there is iteration, so what happened that there are more number of informations are coming. So, as long we have an option to iterate that, then always it is better that we have more options and we can have the comparison and we can choose best among them. So, that is why this particular method help you to get more variety. So, in the final sweep, the interview can depend on the issues that surface during the initial detailing. Maybe in the initial phase it was not in detail. However, in the next last stage, okay, what we can do, we can go into detail and we can have more clarification or better clarification, so that whenever you are redesigning the whole thing, you can avoid those elements, disturbing elements. Efficiency. The use of critical incident is highly efficient means of cognitive task analysis. It has been proved in different literature. Subtle aspects of expertise are brought into play along with the routine aspect of performance that serve as a background. So, when you have more variety, so it is not only same thing, routine thing that you are actually doing. So, you are actually analyzing those critical decisions. Okay. So, inform the cognitive probes. The cognitive probes and what if queries that we do used in sweep 3 and 4 of CDM have been utilized for years and many years. So, actually we are practicing it and deemed to be beautiful in research and development environment to capture the whole process. Okay. So, if that happen, then what will go? If this happen, then what will go? How do you take care of this decision? So, these types of probing questions, these types of queries from the experts actually help to improve the whole system. So, then you can develop more number of designs to give better solution to that particular situation. However, there are disadvantages as I mentioned initially. First, I say it is very uncertain in terms of reliability. There are reasons, right, when we are talking about uncertainty of reliability. Why? Because CDM methodology elicit the retrospective incidents. Okay. So, based on a particular variety, we are actually trying to develop something new. So, it may not happen that exactly similar thing happen in the new process, right. So, it is always there is a chance that the same repeat will not be there, right. So, what happens that it concerns with the data reliability and have been raised due to the evidence of memory degradation over time, because if it is a fresh incident, the stakeholders can give better information, whereas if it is not, there may be a lapse of information. Okay. Then it is very much resource intensive. Okay, you understand that, you know, you need to really collaborate with the all varieties of stakeholders or the operators who were associated with that particular event, and the data is very small because, you know, you cannot have large set of database because one incident, one data, it's like that. So the CDM interviews are more demanding than the traditional survey and structured interview, as we mentioned, and these no cost appear to be more than balanced. However, by the richness of the data obtained from each interview can somewhere save it, okay, because if there is a critical event and if we understand that really in terms of correct way, then that information is definitely going to give you a very rich data which will help you to develop a good system further. However, the whole process will take lot of time, lot of resource, you know, involvement of lot of resources and money. The next is the sophisticated methodologies which requires training. So, utilizing the CDM methodology requires a high level of expertise and training, and effective use of CDM also requires knowledge of cognitive process or phenomena being investigated. So, you really need a skill and experience. So, let us understand what are the connected method and how do we actually take help from each other to conduct these the whole process. So, mainly I will say within method adaptation and cross method adaptation. I will describe them in detail, and within method we have two majorly: variation of timeline uses, because, you know, once we have specific timeline, how do we change the timeline, how do we change the decision making, and second is the adaptive of the cognitive probes. In the second component, that is the cross method adaptation, we mainly have the post observation CDM and additional cross method critical decision method adaptation. Okay. So, under the second we have knowledge audit CDM, like in combination simulation based method and CDM, and cued recall technique plus CDM. Okay. So, let us understand all those things in little detail. So, this is just the representation in sentences, that within method and cross method adaptation. So, within method it says the modify the way of interview conduction. In cross method, synthesize the CDM in other related method. So, let us go into detail about the within method. So, what it says that it is several adaptation of the traditional CDM. Okay. So, traditionally how do we do? From that it's adaptation, however it is not that exactly same. So, adaptation of 4 traditional sweeps, so that we discuss 1, 2, 3, 4. So, we are not following exactly, but it is an some kind of adaptation. There are two sets of notable within method variation. So, one is the variation in the timeline uses, and the second is the adaptation of CDM of cognitive probes. So, first one, which is related to timeline uses. So, what we actually do over here, so we establishing an incident timeline remains a significant sweep within the CDM methodology in specific order. Okay. So, when there is a specific order, from that order what we do, to we try to understand the sequence of event, and also we try to establish the critical decision point that will be focused upon the subsequent sweep. Okay. This we do in the variation of time uses. Okay. So, this variation of time uses will give you some more variety. Okay. So, if this particular incident is happening this time, or if it happens in this time, that how the whole process will change, how the whole sequence will change, okay, where the decision strategies will change. So, this will help you to make more iteratives, more alternate design. Okay. Adaptation of cognitive probes. What it does? A set of cognitive probes that is effective for successfully focusing on the critical incident, and these probe elicit information about situation assessment, situational cues, then expert strategies. Here it is very important when you are talking about expert strategies. So, when we are actually doing it, now you inquire with the novice people who are not really experienced in that field, and then you get idea from the expert people. Now, you really understand what are the basic differences are coming, and can your design, can your intervention make up these differences. So, it is very important. And then goals of incident players and the critical decision and judgment, okay, that we do in the cognitive probes. Whereas in the cross method adaptation, there are two set of cross method adaptation. One is post observation CDM. So, once you complete your CDM, you do some kind of afterwards that observation and what you actually gaining out of it. And the second is the additional cross method critical decision method adaptation, that is also possible. So, in post observation CDM, what is exactly we do? In depth interview you can conduct immediately following an observed event. So, you just observed an event and immediately after that you start following up with the interview. In this type of event, it has to be observed that incident and the decision making during that particular incident, and of course, you can use again the timeline, and you can check what is the kind of required time for that, and then you can compare it. Okay. So, this way we use CDM, and I suggest that we could not take up any example for this particular method because I was not having any data with me to represent. So, you can practice taking up any particular event, and then maybe we can if you have any query we can discuss it. Okay. Thank you.